Hi, this is the Philosophical Angle program, and I am your host, Chris Angle. Along with me are my political analyst, Rick Samuelson. Rick is a venture capitalist out on the West Coast. And audio-wise, we've got Remy Canario, also a political analyst out of the Washington, D.C. Hi, guys. How's it going?
Very well. Hi, Chris.
Okay, the Philosophical Angle program's purpose is to analyze the nature and essence of concepts being used in current media. And this week we're going to analyze actually an article coming off that we got off Breitbart by Mary Chasen on April 22nd. And it was entitled, Islamic State Executes 250 Women for Refusing Slave Marriage. It didn't really catch much in the mainstream media. I didn't see it much, and I was alerted to it on the Buck Sexton show on the Blaze channel, and so I took a peek, and it is an astounding little piece of reporting. So let's. Let's start, and we're going to discuss that in the report that it stated that women have been executed in the Islamic State, 250 of them, for refusing slave marriage. And you got to ask yourself, why? Obviously. I mean, 250 women just executed for not becoming sex slaves. And obviously, these people are in the Islamic State are treating these women and girls as chattel, as human chattel, and really like human cattle. So let's take a look at the article before we begin to analyze it. And let's pull that up. So I'm going to read to you guys a little bit from this article. And it says here, Kurdish news outlets have reported the Islamic State executed 250 girls and women who refused to become their sex slaves or enter temporary marriages with terrorists. At least 250 girls have so far been executed by the Islamic State for refusing to accept the practice of sexual jihad. And sometimes the families of the girls were also executed for rejecting to submit to the Islamic State's requests, announced Saeed Mamouzini, the Kurdish Democratic Party spokesman. The Islamic State has implemented this practice since they took over large areas of Syria and Iraq for their self-declared caliphate. In December 2014, Iraq's Ministry of Human Rights claimed that the Islamic State murdered 150 women because they refused to marry or engage in sexual acts with the terrorists. At least 150 females, including pregnant women, were executed in Fallujah by a militant named Abu Anas al-Ilibi after they refused to accept jihad marriage, said the ministry. Many families were also forced to migrate from the province's northern town of Al-Wafa after hundreds of residents received death threats. The militants buried the victims in mass graves in the city. The families who left lost many children after the militants stranded them in the desert. 8 months later, another report from Mosul surfaced that the Islamic State killed another 19 women who refused to have sex with terrorists. ISIS executed 19 women in the city of Mosul during the past 2 days, declared Mamouzini. The penalty decision came from the background of the refusal to participate in the practice of sexual jihad. Well, it's kind of unbelievable, isn't it? So let's continue with our little analysis. So only in in Islam could this happen? In the Bible, you have to ask yourself, what would Jesus do? And well, obviously the Bible does not allow this type of action, and as terrible as it is, and the precepts of Jesus of Nazareth are totally in contradiction with these actions. It is total anathema to Western thinking. So if soldiers of jihad capture women in battle, they become the booty and the spoils of their victory in their war. And this is how they treat, this is why they're acting the way they do. They're acting as if they're chattel because they've been captured in battle as they overcome new territory. So we have to ask, how can this be justified? Well, it can be because of the Quran. And in the Quran, there's one surah that's actually entitled Booty, and it deals with the spoils of war. But we're going to go over some of the expressions from the Quran that actually these Islamic terrorists will use to justify their action and their execution of these 250 girls and their previous executions. And from the Quran, Surah 33, verse 50, O Prophet, we have made lawful to thee thy wives to whom thou hast paid their dowers, and those slaves whom thy right hand possesses out of the prisoners of war whom Allah has assigned to thee. And from Quran, Surah 23, verses 5 and 6, who abstain from sex except with those enjoined to them in the marriage bond, or the captives whom their right hand possesses. So this verse permits the slave owner to have sex with his slaves. And Surah 4, verse 24, and all married women are forbidden unto you, save those captives whom your right hands possess. And Surah 8:69, but now enjoy what ye took in war lawful and good. And again, lastly in Surah 24, verse 32, and marry those among you who are single, and those who are fit among you, your male slaves and your female slaves. So Islam may not respect the life of the unbeliever due to these surahs and verses and other notations from the hadith, although we didn't discuss any from the hadith. If one were obtained as a slave, so like in possession from battle, or they could be purchased. That's also a legitimate way to obtain a slave. So in analysis of this, we've got two sets of scripture, one from the Bible and one from the Quran. And obviously the Bible does not permit this, and does not permit slaughter of humans, whereas the Quran does, especially if they're from the spoils of war. And so who is right? There you got two sets of scripture, and is there a right or wrong here? Both sides think that they're right. The New Testament is from God's word through the words from God through the words of Jesus, and the Quran is from God or Allah via the angel Gabriel, who then recited the Quran, which really means recitation. So what now? Well, we can just say it's a matter of faith. I can believe in you can believe in one scripture or another. And in the Obama and Clinton and the politically correct world, they would be considered equal and therefore not wrong. And that's probably why that world is not calling it terrorism. So how do we solve this problem? Because if we cannot, then there is no right or wrong, and the politically correct crowd really is the winner. So our only hope now is to look to either to faith or to a logical explanation for this. So we're going to take a moment and use some logic, and we can postulate that when any baby is born throughout the world, it has no inherent dominion over any other baby or life. Baby A born in the Western world does not have dominion over a baby born in the Middle East or anywhere else. There is nothing in the Quran nor the Bible that coordinates one baby having dominion and power over any other. But at one point, baby B, we're going to call it, who grew up in the Middle East, can receive the Quranic revelations later in life, and they may be, and from that believer will be able to think that he could slaughter unbelievers and those who do not follow Sharia, and those who have not received the Quranic revelations, and who does not have such a protocol. So the child of the Bible, really the child of the Western world, must respect all human life. Of course, not all do, but that's our culture. We most do, and the biblical precept is to respect life, and thus Western culture is imbued with this very tenet. And as Matthew, the famous line from Matthew, verse 7, chapter 7, verse 12. So whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. And so pretty much all cultures respect life throughout the world, all life inclusively, except it seems Islam. So Allah gives the priority to the followers of Muhammad by introducing him to the Quran, allowing that follower and that believer to being harsh to the unbelievers, but merciful to one another. And that's from Quran Surah 48, verse 29. So now he's got his justification, but Allah in the Quran does make up for this in one area, because he requires that the Quran allow first a choice, whether to believe and accept Islam or to pay a special tax for not believing. And if you don't pay the tax or believe, then your further penalty is death. But amazingly enough, the women here, I believe, were believers, and so they didn't have that choice that's required in the Quran. They were just the booty of war, and thus chattel, and thus not available for this choice. So unless you have received the revelation as the baby of the Middle East does, you must either accept this recitation that you'll receive later in life, or pay the tax, or die. And but if the unbeliever does not cooperate, the Islam believer may reduce his respect for the life of the unbeliever down to zero, and this allows him to slaughter, punish the believer without hesitation or compunction, which is what he's done here. But this presents a question. The believer in the Quran have respect for other kinds of life, including botanical life and husbandry life, and so that come about in raising cattle and chickens, and which gives sustenance to life. And this type of life receives more respect and a greater evaluation of importance than it does to the humans that are unbelievers by the believers of the Quran. So, and by the way, the unbelievers include Christians and Jews. So, but life of any human, even a slave in the Islamic State, should have more respect than zero, and actually all life should have respect greater than zero. Life needs other life in order to exist, and also as it reproduces. Therefore, life has an importance for itself by virtue of it being life and it being symbiotic with other life, and thus it being symbiotic with other life. Life needs each other, needs it, the life all around you, and thus life has a natural respect, and the nature of respect of life comes about within its organisms, and the nature of respect is the importance of the other life that you come into contact with. When something is important to you, it is because there is a symbiotic relationship with it that produces betterment. And this is the nature of all ethics, and it is the appropriate dispensation of respect. And respect develops because it is the consideration of those with whom you come into contact in order to cooperate and to produce betterment in the forms of goods and services that betters your life and brings us up away from misery. Thus, the practitioners, the practitioners of Islam reduce life to zero. That is, they reduce the value and the respect of life to zero. And it's a contradiction and an anomaly, and obviously an unethical act. And thus, reducing life to zero indicates that the unbelieving male or female slave human is of no importance, and making this an unethical and therefore criminal act because it's done with and it's criminal because it's done with a clear intention. These females were executed. And when you reduce life, the importance of life, to zero, it obviously requires a penalty. But it also has one other facet about it, one other conclusion we can reach. When you reduce the respect of another's life to zero, then all the remaining respect remains within oneself, and thus you can conclude that one is actually totally selfish, becomes totally selfish and totally self-absorbed. This is what these executioners are to themselves, totally absorbed and thus just totally wrong. So enough of me talking philosophically here. We need to take this situation of this type of execution and extrapolate that into the practical decisions of making foreign policy. Well, how should the West, how should the U.S. Respond to this? Should they respond to this? Should our thoughts as a nation be influenced by such a barbaric act? What do you guys think?
Chris, if I may, I'd like to read a couple passages from the Bible. From Deuteronomy, when thou goest forth to war against thine enemy, and the Lord thy God hath delivered them into thine hands, and thou hast taken them captive, and seest among the captive the beautiful woman, and hast a desire unto her, that thou wouldst have her to be thy wife, then thou shalt bring her to thine house, etc., etc. And after that thou shalt go in unto her and be her husband. Now, granted, that's a form of marriage, so it's a little different. But how about in Numbers? And Moses said unto them, have ye saved all the women alive? Now therefore kill every male among the little ones, and kill every woman that hath known man by lying with him. But all the women children that have not known a man by lying with him, keep alive for yourselves. From Judges, go and smite the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword, with the women and the children, and this is the thing that ye shall do. You shall utterly destroy every man and every woman that hath lain by man, and that they found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young virgins that had known no man by lying with any man, and they brought them into the camp to Shiloh, which is the land of Canaan. So the idea that the Bible doesn't have the same kind of permissions for sexual slavery just doesn't hold water. And what you're doing, there's a term for it. It's called exoticization. It's going into another culture, looking at finding an interesting feature or imposing an outside interpretation on that, and somehow claiming that to be the underlying truth. I mean, the fact of the matter is that you actually pointed out exactly why we shouldn't extrapolate the actions of ISIS onto the broader Islamic community, which is that there is a prohibition against taking Muslim women into sexual slavery, and they're doing it anyway. If this were, they are not following the precepts of Islam, they are following the precepts of the lowest human impulses that they can possibly play to in order to attract and to maintain support. And I find your interpretation to be beyond offensive.
So, what were you citing there that prevents them from doing this?
You were the one that said that the women, according to the precepts of Islam, should be given the choice to believe in Islam. And if they do believe, they should not be taken into sexual slavery. These were Kurds who did believe.
Yeah, it does say that, but and that's what they.
So if they're not following the rules, then how can you say that this is actually a truly Islamic act?
Because they look to the chapter of Booty and don't declare them as human but as chattel. And thus they do not, they don't have to accord, they don't have to give them the choice, as I understand it. Now, I could be wrong, but I'm not a theoretician.
There's an inherent contradiction here that.
Oh, I don't disagree. There is definitely an inherent contradiction, absolutely. But their actions are clear that they do, and the West does not involve itself in such behavior, and that's the clear thing. The West doesn't do this. The Middle East sometimes does. Go ahead.
Well, I think I've said my piece. Richard, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, well, I guess my take on this is that many kinds of religious strains exist in the West. Our laws are informed by Judeo-Christian culture, but more importantly, they are separate from our various religions, and we exist under the rule of law. Now, you can argue that the caliphate under ISIS exists under their own version of law, Sharia law, but to me, the fact that we have an independent body of laws that works on a system of precedents that has been tested over many centuries is our greatest source of strength and our greatest bulwark against precisely these kinds of excesses. It also implies that we should never tolerate the application of Sharia law anywhere in the United States, at a minimum, because that, in that instance, that extremely important bulwark would be undermined. On a separate matter, Obviously, there should be condemnation of this, but the fact that the U.S. government doesn't appear to have said much about it is appalling, but I mean, that's not the first time that kind of thing has happened. And I would certainly urge U.S. government officials to condemn these acts. Will that change anything? No. It might even stir them on to do more. So whether the United States is going to intervene more forcefully in the Middle East to try to stem the flow of blood and brutality is fundamentally a political question. We are being gradually drawn back into Iraq. Our troop strength there, if you include advisors and rotating troops, is now up to around 5,000 just in Iraq. And because it's not been effective, the likelihood is that number is going to go higher. It'll be dressed up as, troops there on a rotating basis, so they're not really being deployed, and there'll be all kinds of excuses made. But the reality is, the United States is gradually being drawn back into the Middle East in a combat role. Now, how that ultimately resolves itself, whether we're going to be effective without putting even a much greater number of troops in place to try to battle back the boundaries of ISIS, all remains to be seen. The situation is extremely fluid, extremely confusing. The Iraqi government's reported today in the Wall Street Journal is clearly not stable. The situation in Syria is not stable. Iran is intervening. So it's very hard to discern how this is going to pan out.
Do you think, Remy, let me ask you, do you think that the United States should increase its presence back into the Middle East?
I believe that we have seen some positive developments in the fight against ISIS, and they're relatively predictable. We took out their minister of war, who was responsible for some of their most spectacular victories. We took out the heir apparent. It takes time to develop the intelligence sources that allow you to have such effective airstrikes. And the efforts that went into that are finally starting to pay off some dividends. I think that the real source of ISIS and groups like it is regional instability. And I do not think that a broader American presence, absent the resolution of those issues, particularly Iraq's tremendous political dysfunction, is going to be particularly successful. In fact, one could argue that the threat posed by ISIS to Iraq is precipitating exactly the kinds of change in the new thinking that's going to be necessary. I mean, we've had a resurgence of talk recently, spearheaded by Joe Biden, about the partition of Iraq into three smaller states. I also do not see how Syria maintains its current borders. These are conversations that would have been completely off the table not so long ago, but ISIS has forced us to have them. And you know what? It is time that we did something about the ridiculousness that is Sykes-Picot. So I think that the United States should do everything that it can to target ISIS and do our best to blow it off the face of the planet. But the solutions are not going to come from Washington. They're going to come from Baghdad. They're going to come from Damascus. And hopefully they'll come from Ankara and from the Gulf states as well.
Okay. Rick, any final words?
Well, I think at this stage, it's important that the United States hold firm to its notion of a very strict division between religion and the laws that govern the nation, and hold that up as an example for the rest of the world because it works.
Yeah, I also agree, and with both of you guys. I don't believe in commitment of many troops, perhaps some advisors. I don't think that war going back to a huge presence in the Middle East will be fruitful. It's with the Quran governing the thought processes for of the Middle East. The Middle East has been, as a result, in a crusade against the West ever since 630 AD, and it's ongoing and it's continuing, and so I think that we just have to make a limited presence there, and we can do a lot to impede the progress of terrorism against the West by several actions, but without necessarily requiring a tremendous big presence in the Middle East. Guys, I want to thank you for being with us at the Philosophical Angle, and we'll see you all again next week.
Thanks, Chris. Have a nice week.
Thanks
Goodbye.
a lot.
Thank you.